This is episode 145. And before I introduce this episode, just a reminder to subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the description of the show, or just go to newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com and subscribe to the newsletter. I'm going to send you that newsletter roughly once every 2 weeks. And other than announcements of the new episode of the podcast, you will find there some blogs, articles, commentary, and some other cool stuff. And the reason I'm asking you and I'm pushing so hard for you to subscribe to this newsletter is because the future of social media, or for the future of small creators like me on social media, is nothing but certain. Everything goes in the direction that if the creator wants to reach to the audience, they need to pay. Facebook is like that for a long time, that without substantial budget for ads, you're not going to get any exposure on Facebook. Instagram is pretty much the same. And it looks like Twitter is also going that direction with pushing for the, blue checkmark, which is paid service now to even get any exposure. So basically, social media might be not useful anymore for people like me, small creators, independent creators. And that's why it's important to stay in touch with you. And the best way to do that is a newsletter. So go in the description of the show, newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com, subscribe in there, and we good. Now, in this episode, we talk about the future of hunting. A lot of us who enjoy hunting and fishing even, are kind of worried about the future of the activity. On one hand, dwindling population of wildlife. On the other hand, dwindling social acceptance for the activity, which might and might not be related to dwindling populations of wildlife and people just spending less time outdoors, less time in nature, and not understanding really what's going on. Add to that, hunting organizations and portion of hunting community that basically don't see what's going on. They fail to adapt, and then they fail to work to ensure the future of hunting and fishing for the future generations. So all that paints not a pretty picture, and but maybe that picture is not that bad as some think it is. So our guest today is Richard Prideaux. He's a wilderness skills and survival instructor, and also a writer and photographer, and a host of a podcast called Modern Outdoors Survival. So definitely check out his podcast as well. We talk about this, all these aspects of hunting and its future with Richard. He clearly spent some time thinking about it, and he has very interesting thought on the subject. So I'm sure you will enjoy this episode and maybe form your own opinions about the future of hunting and fishing. And finally, I would like to remind you that this May, in Oxfordshire, there is an environmental debate, live and unscripted, where yours truly is taking part. I'm going to be talking about whether we can still consume meat while having a animal welfare and environment at the forefront of our minds. So this is a subject I'm going to be discussing on a panel discussion on the environmental debate, live and unscripted, May in Oxfordshire. Again, go into the description of this show, and there's a link so you can buy tickets and come and see me talk live. And we can hang out afterwards and have a chat. So that's it for this introduction. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Prideaux and the future of hunting. Richard, good to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, man. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, we're going to tackle today a subject that I feel is not discussed explicitly. It is mentioned implicitly very often. But so let's dive right into it. And my first question to you would be, how do you feel? And I guess the feel is a key word here rather than think. So how do you feel? Will we be able to enjoy hunting as individuals in the 20, 30, 50 years' time?
Oh, now that's a big question, isn't it? Because you could even go down into the levels of enjoying private activities, enjoying things as individuals, or will everything be guided based on public good, and will everything be done to the wider good of the community? That's one of the things I think about. To bring it maybe more on topic, the private enjoyment and will we be able to enjoy it? I think so in some form, but I think what happens in the next 10 years is going to be crucial to what that looks like, because we've gone through, there's a point in that curve of exponential growth, and I forget the name of it, but there's a point you pass where after that point the graph just goes all the way up and you can't stop it. And I think we've hit that in terms of social media and opinions on social media and the way we communicate about things. Because you and I are both old enough to remember 20 years ago where the internet was around, but it wasn't dominant in our culture entirely. And discussion happened at various levels. There were discussions in person. You might write emails back and forth to people, but that was still a limited audience. There'll be things in magazines, things on TV about these different subjects. And you could stay entirely within your own little bunkered world of hunting or field sports, or in my case, mountaineering or climbing and all the things I was doing then, and not really engage with the wider world. Now, if you say, I'm a hunter, I kill things to eat them, and I kill them myself, that means the moment you say that in a public place, you are injected into this wider world of conversation that involves every single other person on the internet, potentially. So the way we will be able to enjoy hunting, I think, how much that is and where we're allowed to do that, and I think that's the operative word, and what society thinks is acceptable is going to be dependent on how we talk about hunting. And when I say we, I mean every single person involved in doing it. Every single person involved in doing that has that requirement to, or that needs to understand that their words, their actions have an effect on what will happen in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Because it's not what we as hunters think. It's not what we as hunters think is the best way to manage things, or the best way to blend ecology with finding food and finding food from wild sources. None of that matters. It's what the rest of the world thinks about us. It's what that rest of that public opinion is. I realize that is not really the question you asked me.
No, that's a perfectly valid start to that conversation. I'm just wondering, like, are we not overvalue the role of the internet and the social media? Because it seems like everything we talk about is like, oh, because social media, it's either social media's fault or something that happened on social media. And we kind of operate, both of us, we kind of operate in this digital space, let's call it this way. But we had many times, it was shown that what's happening on social media, on Twitter's, Facebookies and all these things, that's not really what's happening in the real world. It's quite different. So I'm just wondering, are we not putting too much emphasis on social media in those conversations?
I think maybe the difference is between a macro and a micro level. I could go and speak to any of the gamekeepers in this. I live in North Wales and live in a valley in Northeast Wales. There are 8 or 9 different shoots of one type or another in this valley, and even more if you would go out further. Then there are lots of farms and things in the hills. If I go and talk to the gamekeepers there, the farmers there, about the latest outrage on Twitter about a seal or a piece of wildlife, whatever is the hero animal of the week, they would have no idea what I'm talking about. And at that level, you're right, the internet doesn't really matter. The internet is not real life. Those conversations that we, and I've sometimes been involved in that, get so caught up about and get so emotionally invested in, they do not matter on the day-to-day lives of the people out on the ground managing things. But the people who are on Twitter, who are on Reddit and are on social media talking about these things are journalists, are politicians, are policymakers, people who write opinion pieces in national newspapers. Twitter and the internet is often how they how a lot of these people examine the world, and the way they gain information and gain data, and taking that data to make their decisions. The things that they hate, the things that they love, the things they think are valuable, the things they think are abhorrent, they come partly through this filter of social media. So the people on the ground, they're not affected by it as much up until a policy is made, a law is changed, the funding goes to something else. Then that's when the internet matters, I think. And that's why I still, it would be very easy to shut off my accounts and just go outside and hunt and fish and manage woodland and do the things that I think are valuable for that part of my life. But I do want to be aware. I want to be aware of what people who in London, in the cities, in Europe have, what power they have over my life. And I want to be aware of that by seeing what their opinions are on any given subject. How educated are they? How well informed are they about any of these subjects? I want to know what is going on. I want to have that situational awareness of things. And that's why I think it both matters and it doesn't. On an emotional, individual level, it doesn't matter. Turn your phone off and suddenly all that goes away. But someone out there who has an impact on your life is looking at it, is reading it, is making policy decisions about it.
That's a very good point. Yeah, it is a little bit of that interconnectivity that is, there's too much of it, I think. And I don't mean it in a bad way, in a sense of, to keep some people in the dark. But, it's like, exposing 15-year-old to all the things that are going on in the world because they can't deal with it emotionally. And this is a little bit what's going on social media. Some people are just not ready for certain things, should be eased off, while they're being presented with these things without a filter, or maybe even almost like in a caricature of what it really is. And this is where it's going on. Do you think that this is the reason or for all this outrage, these animals of the week, like you call it, in general, the social license to hunt, I think we can call it that way, is less and less. And why this is happening in your view? Because if you go 20 years ago, 30 years ago, like we were more okay with those things, and now. Is it a matter of just like we getting soft? Is it like social media blame for everything? Like why this is even happening?
I think there's a couple of things at play. One is just we've changed the way we view landscape. We've changed the way we view habitat, nature. The last 20 or 30 years of education about these things, information sharing, of the way where importance is put upon sharing this information. Because I've been involved in that. I've been working in the outdoors as an outdoor educator of one type or another for nearly 20 years. We, and I suppose I'm part of that, or we've told people that nature is there for your recreation. Nature is there as something you go out from your house in the town. You go out there and you enjoy nature. It is a green space. It is there for you. It's there for your mental health. It's there for your well-being. And nature is there. It's something you go and look at, and it's there, and it's all wonderful and lovely. And there's a cultural parallel to that that's also been taught, that and anyone who does anything to harm nature is therefore bad. On that metric scale, you are evil, you are bad because you are harming nature. That's what bad people do. That's what the villain in the Disney film does. They harm nature. So you've got that side where you have the good and the bad. Good is going to look at it. Bad is harming it in any form whatsoever. And death is a form of harm. So that's one aspect of it. And the removal of people from the countryside in a day-to-day level, and making or at least in a way that they interact with the landscape, that they see that their actions have an impact on the landscape. Fewer people working on the land than there were 30 years ago, certainly. And although we have actually, I've noticed a reversal in that trend in the last 5 years or so. There was still a drain of people away from the countryside. So you were less likely to know somebody who worked on a farm, somebody who worked in the countryside of one way or another. It's now, if you're a contractor working in a rural area, you're working on a building site. Effectively, you're working on a construction area. It is a workplace. You might be standing at the edge of an ancient forest, looking out over a meadow system that has been managed in a similar way for 300 years. But you're still working in a workplace. This is your work environment. So it is not seen as habitat. It's not seen as nature. It's not seen as something else. And then nature is what you go off and do at the weekend and go and mountain bike through or walk through or do your adventurous activity through. So you've got that change in perception of landscape and land use, particularly in the UK, where we have so many people and so little land in comparison, particularly south of the Scottish border. They've got that aspect of it. Then there's food and the way we perceive food. Food is either a luxury couture item that is something you see on Instagram or you previously watched on TV. It was almost a fetishized item. You have this very expensive thing with a dribble of something else over it and then something else artfully placed on the edge of the plate. That'll be £300, please, sir. That you have that at level of food. Then you have the stuff that people can actually afford and buy daily, and the accessibility of that. And you can go to any small rural town in England or Wales now and find at least 2 or 3 supermarkets of one type or another, all competing to sell the cheapest food, sell the tastiest food, but also the cheapest, which isn't necessarily the healthiest. But look at me; I'm hardly an example of the finest. I'm hardly an Adonis figure here. So I've had my fair share, but you've got that level of understanding of food as well. So you've got those 2 extremes: cheap and available and tasty, or fetishized and expensive and only for the gods upon high. And if you want anything else in between those things, you've really got to fight your corner. If you want to live an entirely vegan lifestyle, then previously you had to prove, I'm not just a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, and I do this, and this is why, and this is why. And I think vegans developed this culture of constantly having to defend what they were doing, because explaining why, I can't have milk, I'm a vegan. I can't have eggs. No, I know it's not an animal, but I'm a vegan, so I won't eat that. And that developed into almost an offensive, an attack of, I can't do that, and I'm telling you why you shouldn't do that either. So they went off down that track. Then there's the self-sustaining people, the permaculture people, the people who grow their own food, grow their own whatever. They have their own way of doing things, but again, that's a difficult thing to do maybe in modern life, because you've got to have access to land, somewhere to grow these things, somewhere to raise your animals. There are lots of restrictions around raising livestock and things. And then finally, you come to more or less where I am now, which is a mixture of the permaculture, grow your own, and wild food. So it's foraging, wild plants, wild berries, things that are growing wild that are not farmed. And then there's wild meat. So whether that's venison, whether that's wild fowl, whether that's fish. And those are things I'm interested in, and culturally, and interested in sort of nutritionally as well. Each one of those layers they're all bunkered off from each other now. You don't get many vegan wild food people. You get vegan foragers, but you don't get many vegan wild food people. You don't get many permaculture people who are both interested in wild food and not harming any animals of any type whatsoever. So if you're coming into this now as a young person, you're 16, 17, you're starting to formulate your own opinions, you're starting to find your own way, your own information, your own way of doing things. You come to the internet, you arrive at the internet there, and which bunker are you going to fall into? Are you going to fall into a camp that has an entire culture around it, whether that's wild food, hunting, those kind of things? Or is it the permaculture? No, you must grow your own, you must be resilient, you must have your own food supplies for everything. Are you going to fall into that vegan camp? And there are other, all sorts of other flavors and versions of those three that I mentioned. How are you then going to proceed from that? You are now have identified as that food type. I identified as this culture. I identify as these things. If you fall, say, into the vegan camp, well, that's going to preclude any hunting, any fishing, any harming of wildlife, any farming that doesn't involve just growing vegetables. But then if you start diving deeper into it, you go, oh, there's pesticides as well. And then there's the way the soil's tilled and these other things. So you fall into this culture. That's kind of been true for the last 50 years, I would say, because there were the people turning from flower power hippies in the 60s into the Hobbit hippies of the 1970s. And Richard Mabey published Food for Free, and lots of people moved from London to the west coast of Wales and the west coast of Ireland to go and live off the land and wait for nuclear war and wait and be ready there with their pigs and their livestock and their vegetables. So these things aren't, they've happened in the last 2 generations. But in the last 20 years, if you fall into any one of those camps of this is where I get my food from, this is the food culture, this is the wider culture surrounding it, you can find people across the world to be part of your tribe. You can find people, and I think that's the key part to any of this. We look outside of ourselves for validation of our opinions. We look outside of ourselves for why this thing I'm doing, is it okay? Is it okay that I'm doing this? Is it okay that I'm thinking this? Because I think we've evolved to do that. I think that's part of who we were when we were living in groups, when the number of people we knew was Dunbar's number. It was only the number of people we could form meaningful relationships with was about the size of an average hunter-gatherer tribe. We would look across the tribe and go, okay, are my opinions correct? Am I doing things in the right way? And from that, we determine, okay, yes, is this okay? Is the feedback I'm getting from people okay? I think we still do that, every one of us as humans. It's just now the tribe is the internet. And there's, what's that, rule 34? If you look for it on the internet, there's something there that matches it. You can find anything on the internet, someone's already doing it. And because everyone has to eat, everyone has to consume food. Food is one of those baseline cultural points for any of us that if you fall into one of those categories, you are now identified as that thing. You are identified as a hunter, identified as a vegan, identified as a whatever. If that's your thing, you can find people to say everything that you think, everything that you believe, all of your suppositions, they are correct. Which makes it very, very hard to examine what you're doing and go, well, is it correct? Is it this? Is it, within my own objectivity of good and evil, of bad, of okay? Is this, you don't look at any of these things and say, okay, yeah, well, that's okay, but I don't agree with that, but I have to do that because I have to achieve that. You just go, no, I'm good. Why? Because this person on the internet says so, and they validate my opinions. So I seem to be on this episode answering in 10-minute blocks of conversation, but that's the summation of it. That's the opinions have changed because these opinions have been around for a long time, but now we have the tools to find an entire tribe who agree with you, and they'll join forces with you in attacking the other tribe.
Yeah, but that wouldn't explain like why all of a sudden the, let's call, hunting tribe is lower or smaller or whatever. And I just want to come back to what you started with your last 10-minute block is that
Sorry.
No, you're good. That's what we do here. That you said that, nature, whoever harms nature is bad, and but when you look at the nature and the industrial scale harm that we're doing to nature, that is like, it's like, why would you think that the hunters are harming nature while then you have all the other industrial complex that is also harming nature? So I find it hard to reconcile.
I think that sort of proves my point, although I didn't make that point explicitly, that if you find enough support for your top level opinions, then you can ignore all the deeper stuff. And there's a concept I came across last year, which I quite like, which is this idea of low resolution and high resolution arguments. So a low resolution argument is this bad. Why? I don't know. This bad. That's all you need to know. This is bad. Why? All these people say so. That's a low resolution argument. It's like an 8-bit computer game. It's very, very blocky. A high resolution argument has all of those facets, all those wrinkles, all of those. Well, this is a factor, and by this cultural understanding of what is worth it, what is worthy to the culture, what is not worthy to the culture, then we've decided this is bad, this is good. But there's also this, and there's this, and in order to have this thing, this happens in that country. We all agree that's bad, but there's no other way to do that. And I find it's more interesting to have conversations with people who have a high resolution argument, because that's my hope now, is to develop a greater resolution, greater understanding of any of the things I care about. And anytime I think of something as, well, this is definitively bad, that's the end of it, or this is definitively good, that's the end of it, I try and stop myself and go, right, you've had too simplistic of a reaction to that. You're too emotional of a reaction to that. You probably don't understand enough of it. If you don't look at anything and go, well, this is good, but I like this, but I don't like that, and life's complicated. If I don't end up with that at the end of it, I think I haven't understood it properly. So the thing you said about industrial processes that harm nature, then you can see this in what we're talking to each other via the internet. We both have smartphones. We both are using electronic devices. The things that go into mining the rare earth minerals that make a lot of these things work. The phone that's on my desk here, the lithium battery in this head torch. I'm surrounded by lithium batteries here. Some people in Africa died for those.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
People got very upset about blood diamonds, but they'll send an angry tweet about it from their iPhone. We can't live on this planet and not have an impact on things. And the more things you have, the more tools you have, the more we have a globalized trade of things. And we need this technology, but the one thing that makes this technology work, that's all over here in Central Africa, or that's all over here in Afghanistan, or that's here wherever. Okay, well, in order to have those things, you're going to have an impact on those places. So that would be part of that high resolution argument thing. The low resolution argument will be killing things is bad. Why? It's bad. That's it. If you stop there, it's too simplistic.
Yeah, you made an argument of about the food and the people understanding food, where the food comes from, and and also communication, social media. Do you think that if we want, because I presume that we coming from the perspective that we would like have more high resolution arguments, but also more people understand what hunting is about, and have a more educated conversation about this thing. Do you think that we as individual hunters, but also we as a collective, we hunting organizations and so on, improve that communication, use these tools of the internet to get more people understand, and perhaps even further than that, which is something that you said that you do, or you used to do, and we need to talk about it as well, what you do, that get those people into the nature, into the wild, get yank them from their computers and from in front of their smartphones, and just like, hey, look at that, a mountain, a river, look at this thing in the river, it's a fish, you can eat this, and kind of start educating people that way. Do you think we doing like a really, really poor job at it, or like, what's your view on this?
So if you'd asked me when I was 23, 24, I would have said, yes, all you need to do is take people into these wild places, and they will learn to love it, and they will learn to understand it in the way that I do, because that's sort of what happened to me, although I grew up with it more. And it was, I would have agreed that education and opportunity makes a difference. The problem is, or at least for me, is that it has never been easier in the UK. This is from my experience, but I have friends in the States who have similar things, similar experiences there. It has never been easier to find a wild place to go hiking, to go mountain biking, to go and travel into and enjoy. There are mapping apps that are freely available, and the good ones aren't that expensive. You can go on there and find the GPS file for anyone who's gone out and done that hike before, and you can follow in their footsteps almost exactly. You can find outdoor clothing and equipment, which is what 20 years ago would have been world-class expedition class, is now available in supermarkets. It's never been all the things that used to be barriers to entry that gate kept, I suppose. The outdoors were things like equipment, access to information, travel, opportunity, and all of those things are so much easier than they were 20 years ago.
Even opportunity.
I would say so, yeah. Was it 2000 was the Countryside Right of Way Act for England and Wales, so that gave you the right to roam, which opened up huge areas of upland and wild spaces in England and Wales. The Land Reform Act 2004, which was that, but on steroids for Scotland, and included wild camping and things within that. I would say, compared to the 90s, we have so much more opportunity in England and Wales, at least for non-hunting recreation. Hunting is the thing that's still limited, but maybe we can talk about that later. But in terms of just being outdoors in those spaces, the opportunity is so much better than it was 20 years ago, or just over 20 years ago. So I would have thought by now, if access to green spaces, access to wild areas was going to make a cultural change within the UK, and changes maybe to more of what we perceive to be a Scandinavian culture, where outdoor recreation and understanding of the landscape is more ingrained in the average person than it is here in the UK, because lack of access was always the argument. We don't understand the outdoors. We don't understand nature because we have been kept from it by our feudal overlords, and they have kept us from nature. And by going into nature, we will learn how to appreciate it. I'd have thought that would have kicked in by now. Instead, what I've seen is that what we have done by saying, this is nature, this is for you to explore, this is how you do it, these are the places you can go to, these are wild areas, this is actually farmland, but you can go and walk across here, you can go across here, and even you can wild camp, sort of. I mean, just don't advertise it too much, go above the last fence line. The farmer's not going to come and check. If you're gone by 9 o'clock the next day, he won't know you're there. That has been ingrained culturally across the outdoor sector in the UK for over 20 years. What we've done is say all that to people, and they've gone, righto, that means these green spaces, they're for me. They're for me to go out into. I can mountain bike here because all these people do, and it's enshrined in law. I can do this. That means I can do more mountain biking here, and I can get more people here mountain biking, and we can set up a guiding business that's for other people to come out and enjoy. And it sort of sidestepped the entire nature part of it. Even so, now all the outdoor training qualifications, a lot of them have things like the Mountain Leader Award and things like that. They have elements of ecological training built into the system, built into it. You have to demonstrate some ecological natural history knowledge to pass these assessments. The way that's been presented, though, is being able to identify these 5 mosses, being able to identify this. What's that bird up there? What does this tree? What species of tree is this? And the way that is presented to the students and by the assessor and by the organization is because you need to tell other people what those mosses are. But never is it mentioned in any of these awards. And I've gone through a good number of them, and I've worked in that world for a while. never in those things is it mentioned. And that by being here in this forest that nobody really comes into, you are slowly degrading the quality of this habitat for the wildlife that live here. By making this now effectively a trail centre for mountain bikes, you are making it harder for wildlife to live here undisturbed. We have said, by taking people into green spaces, these green spaces are for you, therefore people value them based on what it means to them. Becomes an entirely human-centric process.
You cannot expect that you're going to get people in and then they're going to, get enlightenment all on their own. And you touch on it, that the education that we have is flawed. So, and I suppose this is my point, that should we ramp up the education in terms of what you said about the habitat, about the hunting, about the things that we feel are missing, because like I struggle with the great access to the outdoors, and so maybe in the outdoors, but I would say, and it all depends on the time scale, right? You take him 19s, 80s, 90s, that's fine, but I feel like if I would like to go somewhere really like into nature where I don't have 2 hours walk to the next road, it's hard, it's almost impossible. And I guess that's a part of what you're saying, that we have all those people then, and that's becoming and you can make an argument there's too many people and they have too much access to it, and because they're but then we going back to the previous one, okay, so then you're going to keep all those people in a city who don't understand a damn thing about the outdoor. So it's kind of like a catch-22. What you're going to do, you're going to bring those people in and educate them, and then you have all those people there, and the place loses the very quality you were looking for and you were trying to communicate. Or contrary to that, it's like, no, you cannot go there, there's too many of you, you're degrading habitat, stick to your nightclubs and pubs. But then what we started this discussion, all those people will start influencing policies and politicians and so on, and they will go there, we got, what are those people doing there? They should be in front of a TV with us rather than harming nature or whatever. So I feel like the nature is shrinking. We have it less and less and less and less. And on those, I don't know. I'm not pretending that I have a like a societal solution to that, but something in me is telling me that we should educate people more. And you might know, but the listeners probably know that I created like a guide for how to become a hunter in Ireland, because I found there is a substantial portion of people in their late 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s who would like to try their hand in hunting and getting their food and so on. They have no idea where to start. And hunting organizations are not helping in any way, because they are kind of like there are already hunters there. And they have a training course and all this and that, but unless you know someone who you comfortable to ask the question, that you won't find that information. You may, like you said, you may do the mountaineering guide or like mountain biking or whatever, but like how to become a hunter, how would I, harvest a meat for my freezer? Unless you know someone, and a lot of those people who live in the city, they do not. You're stuck. There's no way. So I feel like we missing the trick here, perhaps.
I can't disagree with any of that, really. And this is why I prefer the high resolution argument. There is no simple answer to any of these things. And I think one of the first steps is honesty. Honesty from all organizations, from all parties, all sectors of outdoor use. If we just call it outdoor recreation, if we include all field sports, hunting, angling within that. There are people who work in that, but it's still outdoor recreation. It is not industry as such. So within all sectors of that, more honesty is required from the outdoor activities, mountain guiding, hiking, hill walking, mountain biking, kayaking, all of these things. If you go and speak to any of the national governing bodies or the national organizations for that, mountain training, British Mountaineering Council, British Canoe Union, all these places, they are entirely human-centric organizations. They will talk about their memberships, their members' access to land, their members' activities, development. Can we get climbing into the Olympics? If we can, how are we going to train the next 3 generations of climbers? All these things. And then the outdoors is a venue to them. It is the place you go to do these things. At no level, and I've asked, because over the last couple of years, and we've been talking about this online and through various things, I've asked these organizations out of curiosity, and then out of more of a, okay, so no, what do you really think point of view. I've asked these organizations, what do you think about your ecological impact of these activities? What are your statements for that? And it's just, most it boils down to either we won't answer you, and we don't have to, or our activities cause no ecological impact whatsoever. And a couple of times I've had, and it was from one of the canoe organizations, they responded entirely with all the problems that fishermen cause and anglers cause, which was interesting, I thought. And the same with the farming argument was brought up when I asked one of the hill walking organizations. So that was sort of in person with one of their chief execs, but they immediately talked about the harms of overgrazing in upland areas. So hill walking can't be a problem because that's much worse. Okay, but you can't answer a problem with someone else's problem. That's not how you solve your problem.
Yeah.
So I think for the outdoor organizations, they need to acknowledge that the way they present things is very, very biased, and it's only one facet of things. And that includes all of their agents, say anyone who's working under one of their qualification schemes, anyone who's working under their overall access campaigns and things like that. They have to acknowledge, or they should acknowledge, that yes, humans being in this landscape, in this habitat, will have an impact, will have an effect on that habitat, on that landscape. Whether it's something that is acceptable to you or not, well, that's based on your personal scale of acceptability. But just, you are being there, you're doing something, you're crushing this moss, it's going to take a little bit longer to rebound, that kind of thing. I mean, I teach tracking and ground sign awareness to the police, so I know how, just standing somewhere, yeah, you're going to have an impact on that landscape, and I'm going to show you how to take a photo of it and find the bad man. Just being there will have an impact on it. Dogs off leads, constant noise, vehicles going past in a mountain bike trail area, something like that. There will be this impact. Conversely, the field sports side of things, the hunting side of things, they need to acknowledge, I would say, that the world has changed.
Yes.
That if you have an organization that's entirely staffed by, or at least led by, men who are over the age of 50, you are not going to be representative of people under the age of 40 because you grew up in different worlds.
Over the age of 50 is like a bunch of youngsters.
Yeah.
Compared
and this is
what I see.
Yeah, and I've got several friends who will be listening to this going, hang on. But it's like, no, I am talking about you, but only because I am just under the age of 40, and I am still at the older age of things in terms of internet culture and those and that wider social media thing. The influences of everyone who grew up with the internet are very, very different to those who grew up before, and your view on life is going to be different, and the future is still going to be skewed by the internet and social media and those opinions and those things. So by putting tradition, and this is the way we've always done things, ahead of anything else, and then putting an overlay of ecology and wildlife management on top of that, you are not being honest. You are being as dishonest as any of the mountaineering organizations when they say human access is not a problem at all, we should have it everywhere. Because you're putting your traditions, your cultural way of doing things ahead of what the reality of the situation is now and what the reality of the situation will be in the next 5 years. I've got a friend who's a fairly senior member in a shooting organization, and we were talking about this and lead and driven game shooting and all these things. And he was saying, no, he is convinced that he is the last generation that will be anywhere near it, that driven game shooting is dead in 10 years, lead's gone, gamekeepers will be gone, or at least there'll be one or two, and it's going to be pest control and maybe some and deer reduction, and that's what hunting will be in 20 years time. And when I asked him then, okay, so what do you think can be done about that, he said, it doesn't matter, it's all gone, it's done. And he was so nihilistic, so hopeless about it. And I've met that opinion a couple of times where it's people are managing the today and they feel like they're like the caretakers on taking care of the building for the last 10 years of its life. You know, and this building is going to be knocked down in 10 years. They won't be around by then anyway, or 20 years or 30 years. So enjoy what time you have now. And I'd like that to change within the shooting organizations and some more honesty about that. And thirdly, the honesty of the impact of commercialized hunting. We need in England, more so than Wales, because we have very, very few deer in Wales, but in England, deer are endemic. They cause huge problems for forestry, for farming, for wildlife management and wildlife habitat creation overall. But because hunting is perceived as a luxury, it's perceived as a luxury activity, it's a high-level activity that you can charge a lot of money for, because if you're turning up there stalking, you've got at least £1,000 on your shoulder of rifle and things, paperwork. They can charge for it. So you have, in the areas of England where deer control is vital, you have people charging hundreds of pounds, if not thousands of pounds, for stalking. Because, well, I'm a landowner, I can make a lot of money from people wanting to come and shoot all of these deer. That can't be supported. That can't be supported by the shooting organizations, just in the same way that, steel shot's okay for newer shotguns, so we can keep driven game shooting, so we can get rid of all lead. It's like, well, that's going to knock out air rifles, that's going to knock out rimfires, that's going to knock out these smaller calibers. That is actually the majority of the numbers of people who are shooting of one type or another hunting in the UK, but it's okay because really the big driven game things are going to continue. And because steel will be fine for that, so we can keep importing birds in, firing them out over people, and people can pay £3,000 to stand on a peg for the day, blowing pheasants out of the sky. And that's the problem I have with the shooting organizations, particularly. I've got less knowledge of the angling organizations, so they seem to be doing a hell of a lot better. But the shooting organizations do seem to be skewed towards money, towards the big business side of things, and much less towards the grassroots, lower level side of things. And when I talk to them about the younger generation, and when I talk to them about maybe the things they're missing, then they immediately go, yeah, well, we've got this young shots program and we teach these kids that. And it's like, no, never mind the kids. We can sort those out second. There are people between the ages of 25 and 45 who are interested in hunting, interested in finding wild game, interested in these things, who have no access to it because they go to your website and there's lots of people wearing tweed who are all over the age of 45 holding £10,000 worth of shotguns, or it's not representative of them. And there's that thing about American culture, which has so much, because of the internet again, has so much of an effect over on this side of the Atlantic that is not acknowledged by either the hill walking, hiking organizations or the outdoors organizations or the field sports organizations. But what's that conversation you and I have had several times, that the Meat Eater podcasts have, and Joe Rogan and people like that, have much wider audience in the UK here than any of the other outdoor things.
Yes, absolutely. No, man, you're hit the nail on the head here, with like a need to reform of those organizations. I see the same thing. It pains me immensely. It's even going down to the level of some of those organizations, they really don't understand the world of social media, which again is like coming up and up over again here. But that's just a inconvenient true, if you like. um, they don't know how to deal with the current situation. So anyway, just going back to what you said, did I get that right? Which is maybe a little surprising to me, but I agree. If that's the case, what you meant, that you mean more of a, we need like more of a democratization of hunting, democratization of shooting and fishing, and that way getting more people in and letting them, being, presenting that as a part of nature, being in nature, rather than this golficization of hunting sort of thing, right? Where I usually talk about this European and American type of hunting, where the European type of hunting is like you said, you need several £1,000s of gear, and you show up with in your fat car, and it's like a massive social event. While I think, and I started hunting late in life, and this is like the US TV. This is what sparked my, that's what captivated me. Like this wilderness, this being on the landscape, and kind of in tune with nature and in tune with the deer, and like we don't have that. So I'm guessing that's where you're coming from. Like we need more people doing this, but in a correct way, in air quotes.
Yeah, democratization. I don't know if it's necessarily the right term, but access opportunities would be good. I mean, you could take all of the arguments made for outdoor access. I mean, and in England, we've just had the Dartmoor wild camping discussion, and the change in interpretation of that 1985 Dartmoor Commons Act, and there's still the furore going on over that now. You could take the arguments made by access campaigners about all of the reasons that people need to have access to this landscape because of the historical rights, because of what it means culturally, because of what it means in terms of mental health, in terms of what it means about sharing these resources that aren't then bunkered with individuals, or bunkered more often with corporations and state organizations, and making it accessible to more people. You could take all those arguments, and if you applied it to, say, hunting, and to put it into shooting, and say okay, so with these are designated hunting areas. I mean, here in North Wales, we've got Clycaenog Forest, which is, I'm pointing that way because it's directly there behind me up on the hill there. But it's to the west of here. You have forests in mid Wales, open areas there, which are owned by the state. They're owned by the Welsh government, or Welsh Water, I think, owns some of them. And there would be hunting opportunities of one type or another in there, which you could follow the American model of managing habitat so that there is a surplus of wildlife, which means people have the opportunity for hunting within a hunting tag lottery system and those kind of things. That would be theoretically possible. And you can make those same arguments, and they would scan. They would be a valid argument even if you disagreed with it. But nobody anywhere would go anywhere near that discussion in hunting, in the hunting organizations, in the Welsh government, in any kind of public discourse. If you talked about, okay, what about opening up land for public hunting? And I know that's something you've discussed many times, and or subjects around that. That would have there's no cultural interest in that from anyone in power, from anyone with a voice within the hunting community, with anyone in those things. I don't necessarily advocate for it, but an argument could be made for that. I don't think it's possible, and I don't think it's likely to happen because of the culture that we have in the UK, and the culture that is still, that we won't shift. Going back to what I was saying earlier, that we've had 20 years of outdoor access and the culture hasn't gone in the direction that people intended it to originally, or at least in terms of relationship with the outdoors, I don't think we'd have that cultural change here if we changed our opinions towards shooting and made it more accessible. So, and politically, I am generally not in favor of state having a mandate over people in terms of we should change this law to force people, to force landowners, to force these places to make it more accessible for other people. I generally don't agree with those kind of things. I think you can have organic systems that will develop over maybe 3, 4, 5, 10 generations, but having right, on this date, we're going to change the law and you all have to change with it, I generally think that's a bad idea. And I keep being proven right, but or at least in my opinion, with things. And I don't know. Yeah. So democratization, not necessarily, but honesty of discussion. So at least these things can develop organically, because that's happened in agriculture. I'd say agriculture is getting better. If you're under the age of 45 now and you're working in agriculture, and particularly if you're inheriting the farm, you're taking it on, you're more likely to be open to the ideas of permaculture, to regenerative agriculture, organic with a lowercase o, so you don't have to pay into the system, but planting hedges, those kind of things. The way landscape is being managed here in Wales, at least, and I know friends in England, it's changing and it's being driven by people, not by the state, not by, oh, we're going to plant this hedgerow because we get more money for it. It's no, I know lots of farmers who are planting hedgerows, doing these things, putting in these wildlife corners because they realize that the trend they were on with their parents and their grandparents and their great grandparents since the Second World War was heading in a direction that wasn't going to continue. It was going to end up with them losing the farm and them ending up with a barren wasteland of rye grass. That's all they would have. So they are more interested in ecology, more interested in that natural history of their farm. That is something that has developed not through state control, not through by the National Farmers Union or anyone like that saying, you must do this because it's for the greater good. It's done through honesty and education and more levels saying, yeah, actually the spreading of thousands and thousands and thousands of litres of slurry across the field year after year maybe hasn't had the impact we wanted it to, or what we were told by the farming organizations that it was, yeah, it's fine, just do this, it's fine, it's a good free fertilizer and you can do it. It won't have any detrimental effects. And then 30 years later, yeah, maybe lads, that's not such a great idea. Those changes are happening organically. I would like that to see that happen in both the outdoors world, so hiking, mountaineering, climbing, which are the same thing, outdoor recreation, and shooting and field sports, rather than trying to really bunker down on their own beliefs and say, well, the way we've done things, the way we've always told you to do things is right. Just keep doing those things. We'll win, lads.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it goes to education, really, which I am of the opinion that education is the solution to almost every single problem. And it's a lack of education in certain areas is a cause of these problems. Richard, if you were given the powers, being in one of the hypothetical, not existing but powerful hunting organization, or maybe I know that you don't like the government, but maybe if you have an impact on the government policies, what would you prescribe? What would you like to see? And you can just assume that you have like almost unlimited powers, including changing people's minds and so on. Like, what would you do? What would you advise to do to ensure that hunting, fishing, these type of interactions are going in the right direction over the next 20, 30 years?
I don't hate the government, but I do because I work for them occasionally. It's just...
Yeah. I'm just saying that you said that you're not in favor of going like top down. So I was kind of
to tie that one off, then I would say that one of my edicts would be, if you ever wanted to become a politician, that should then bar you from being able to be one for life. If you wanting to do that should then preclude you from the option to do it. I would say an opening of dialogue between, and actively pursuing dialogue between the different land users, between access to land is at the crux of these issues, and forcing dialogue in a way through, I don't know how you would force it without then state control or anything else. So this is all hypothetical. Forcing dialogue between these users so that the British Mountaineering Council has to talk to Basque, has to talk to the National Gamekeepers organisations, and that their policies have to interact with each other. That otherwise they just become political arms. They become so politically aligned with one viewpoint or another, left or right, authoritarian or libertarian, and whatever the divide is now. And they both sit in their corner of the Overton window of acceptability. So forcing those things, and also explaining to the membership of those organizations as well that why that is happening, because these organizations are, on the face of it, all democratized already, so that they have AGMs, they have the chief execs and the executive boards of these organizations are led by the opinions of their members. But that cuts two ways. If what you're doing as an organization only agrees with some of your members or only appeals to some of your members, then those are the members you'll have, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So opening it out and making it more acceptable, opening that dialogue out to the wider world, so that no organization can say that these people over there, they're bad. Those are the bad guys because they disagree with what we're doing. Get them, lads. You can't say that these are these antis. Why? Because they're hill walkers. All right. Well, I'm a hill walker and I own several shotguns and several rifles. I'm hardly anti that, but because I'm standing here in yellow Gore-Tex, you are therefore immediately think I am the enemy. And I've come across that several times. It's like I almost have different modes of clothing because I've had this where through my work, when I'm working on an estate, on a big estate, talking with one of the gamekeepers there, but because I was wearing like a RAB or mountain equipment Gore-Tex for doing it, they refused to believe I was involved in any kind of hunting or field sports. But if I turn up wearing a Ridgeline or turn up wearing something else, then it's, oh yeah, you're wearing the uniform of acceptable dress for this conversation. And that's one of the things and hope to do with our business and the things we're changing is making that conversation more blended. But that was the other thing I'd like to do is if we could force, we're given that power, and I'm not really exercising this power very well, am I, that you've given me? But if you could make people talk with each other honestly about what their aims are, because if you take away the politics of it, if you take away that, okay, open access is a policy of the left, it is not a policy of the right. Access to land it's a policy of the proletariat. It's a policy of these people. We must seize the means of food production by taking your field, whatever it is. Those outdoor, you can't say that is a left policy, because what if it's outdoor access for hunting? Well, hunting is a right issue, so should that be a right oh no, it gets all confused then. So by making these organizations talk to each other and find the common ground, but also find the areas where they differ, but maybe where there's some hypocrisy, where they publicly say one thing, but actually the reality of being a landowner means that those things that you say publicly are really hard to implement. I mean, going back to the wild camping ban, you've got those organizations on Dartmoor, and it's not in wild camping ban, it's just removal of the right to do it. On those organizations that own sections of Dartmoor, you've got the Forestry Commission, you've got the Ministry of Defence, you've got the National Trust, you've got these other places. A lot of the organizations saying that, no, you should definitely be allowed to wild camp here and we will fight for your right to do it. They own land elsewhere. They own quite big acreages of land, particularly the National Trust. It's one of the top 10 landowners in the UK. They could overnight say, yes, you have the right to wild camp here and do what you want. But they don't, because the realities of being a land manager makes it very, very complicated. So if you could bring some of that internal discussion within that organization between the access team and the land management team of those organizations, they have that dialogue themselves, and I've seen it and I've witnessed it. If you could bring that to the wider discussion to show this is a really complex issue, there's lots of different viewpoints here, and no one is right and no one is really wrong either. But you are convincing yourselves that your point of view is entirely right, your point of view is, or their point of view is entirely wrong. Again, because you can find enough people in that organization, in that world, to tell you that you're all right. So,
no, I think you're exercising that powers I gave you in an excellent way. This is exactly it. Conversation. I presume that you would also include the likes of wildlife trusts and things like that in this conversation. Yeah. I don't know like what a wildlife trust situation looks in the UK, but I was in my naivety when I was coming to hunting. In my naivety, I was shocked that wildlife trusts are actually not like a good buddies with hunting organizations, because they should. And it's like, what? So like I said, I was just coming into this hunting world and I was very naive, and I thought that this is just a common sense, and then it was like need to get over like how this is not happening, because what you said, the people are just biased and confirming their own biases all the time.
I have several friends who work for wildlife trusts. I have worked with them as a contractor. I've trained them. I've created media for them. I've consulted for them on different projects. My partner used to work for one of them, and she used to work for a countryside organization as well. And I would say, as a whole, with that broad sweeping brush that never applies at the granular level, but as an organizational whole, wildlife trusts are human-centric organizations, because wildlife does not have any money. Dormice do not have pockets. They do not have a wallet. So you have, in order to fund this organization and the charitable works of the organization, you need to make money. The way you make money is either through donations from individuals, donations or through membership and those kind of things, in which case the people, you have to position yourself so that people will give you money for the things that they think are valuable. So what you find is wildlife trusts buy up areas, turn it into a nature reserve, put a car park at the edge, and then degrade the value of that habitat for wildlife by encouraging people to go there as a dog walking venue. And as every 17 minutes, a dog comes through that patch of cover in the spring, you get very few ground nesting birds there. You get very few of these things. And very little predator control happens on wildlife trust sites. Very little. You do habitat creation, but habitat creation on its own, as has been proven time and time again, is you need the other legs of the stool. You need the other legs of the three-legged stool. So that's one of the things that happens with organizations like the wildlife trusts. The other funding comes from grants. Used to be European grants, and now it's things like the National Lottery funds and Prince's Trust and these kind of money transmitting organizations, that they have huge pots of money given to them that they then disseminate to other organizations. And sometimes it's weird corporate stuff like landfill tax, landfill money from waste companies has to then go to something else, so they have another project. But what crept in 10, 15 years ago and is just central to all of these funding applications is, what does this benefit humans? Does this project benefit enough humans? Does it benefit enough people from a lower income? Does it benefit enough people from an ethnic or religious or other minority diversity, or other diverse group or other group that is perceived minority status? These are literally form boxes on the form, or you have to explain why my tree planting project in this river valley, how does this benefit a minority community of some type or other? These are tags that are put on this funding. And this is not a diversity thing. This is not an ethnicity thing. It just shows that you cannot release that funding for a wildlife project or a habitat project until you show what it does for humans. And that is the problem with any of these wildlife organizations is that if they said, we're going to take your money, we're going to buy this place, and we're going to manage it as the best habitat for wildlife because there's a badger on our logo and we like wildlife, I would fight for them every day of the week. But because what they say instead is, we are a very large and expensive charity with lots of people and lots of expenses to support. No one in there is well paid. These organizations, even the chief executives, are relatively poorly paid compared to other things, but the money goes into a lot of other stuff. It's a very expensive thing to do. They have to put people first because people generate the money, enable for them to keep doing what they're doing. And that, I would say, the same goes for the RSPB and other places like that. Those wildlife organizations, coming to it, you'd think, yeah, well, wildlife hunting, they go hand in hand in lots of other countries. Here in the UK, if you're a hunter, you're a wildlife murdering bastard. Whereas if you work for the Wildlife Trust or a organization like that, you're a badger hugging good person.
You're right. There's this perception that you talked about earlier, and also what you said about honesty, and part of like something that we discussed as well is like those wildlife organizations, they need donations, they need membership money, and they tend to revolve around certain types of members. And then if they go with a policy of, hunting or whatever, then they will basically lose a portion of their members, and they just don't want to do that. They can't afford in many cases to do that. And so they're not saying things that they even know, because usually when you talk with those people, I'm sure that's your experience as well, they know those things. They're reasonable people. But then on the organization level, we cannot do this because like 40% of our members would leave, and we saw those examples. Richard, you mentioned at least a few times what you do, and you do a lot of interesting things, training courses for police, this and that. You also have a podcast. Please lay it out, everything that we need to know about what you do, and how people can maybe avail for your service, if there is a such thing that they can do, and how to get in touch with you, all the things.
This is the bit I'm never very good at, because everything I'm too diffuse. I have too many things. I've done everything I can to avoid having a real job in my life. So far, so good. You can split it into three things. I train people in outdoor skills of one type or another. So I've worked in the mountains. I train doing different things. So you can find most of that via originaloutdoors.co.uk. There's also, that's where you'll find our podcasts, and there'll be plural podcasts, maybe by the time this comes out, and several different titles and several different things that we do. There's a YouTube channel associated with that. There are blogs. There's all sorts of things there. But that covers hunting as well as wild food and some other things. So it's not just an outdoorsy channel. I'm a photographer, which if you find at Rich Prideaux on Instagram, that'll probably take you to where you need to go for that. But that's less and less of what I do now, maybe. And then thirdly, I consult for places that do that use wild plants and use wild materials in commercial products. So I work with a skincare brand that uses wild plants in their skincare products, which you'll then are made and go off to very expensive places all around the world. And I work with chefs and restaurants in different places and consult with them about using wild plants and wild game in their dishes and how to use that. None of which is easy to share in a way. At the wrap-up, I'm meant to do at the end of a podcast. So I told you I was rubbish at this. If you want to come and hear hours and hours of me talking about the outdoors in one easily shareable thing, go to Modern Outdoor Survival. Search for that on all podcast players and things like that. And that from there, you'll hear hours and hours of me talking about the outdoors and how not to die in them.
That's awesome. And I'm going to put all those links in the description of the show for people who wants to have it clearly there, or maybe for people who won't make it, hour 11 minutes into the episode. So at least they have it there. Man, that was awesome conversation. It seems like there's like another podcast in there somewhere to talk to you about all the stuff like a survival and things. But then I'm sure that people who can't wait for that, they can go to your podcast, listen to there, and I'm a listener as well. And there's a lot of very interesting stuff. Listen, any words of wisdom that you would like to leave our listeners with? Both hunting and fishing listeners, as well as the listeners who are maybe more into observing rather than participating.
Don't always assume that the person on the other side of the argument is completely wrong, and don't assume that you're completely right.
Short and to the point. Richard, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.